February morning is generous with horizon. Barn swallows stitch low arcs. Coffee leans its shoulder into steam. In that kind of light, the Dalton boys learn chores before they learn headlines. Louis and Adeline's brood many children, more work than a week admits. Among the sons, Frank, Grat, Bob, Emmett, Bill, sisters who kept the center even when weather didn't. Indian territory pressed close to their days. Rivers carried stories farther than roads did. Horses translated. Frank Dalton wore the first star in the family. Deputy U.S. Marshal under Judge Parker's court, Fort Smith, papers folded in a vest pocket, a neat script, a habit of showing up where trouble had convinced itself no one would. One November morning the ledger turned. A warrant served. Fresh alive with men who preferred their own calendars. A gunfight's short grammar. When the smoke walked away, Frank did not. Grief rebuilt the house quietly. Chairs noticed the empty place more than anyone said out loud. Older brothers do a peculiar work in families. When one leaves, younger ones inherit gravity they did not ask for. Grat and Bob picked up deputy papers for a season, working the same hard miles through the nation's warrants folded against rain. Long rides that begin with patience and end with either a handshake or a shot. Pay was thin. Duties were thick. Deputies bought their own ammunition and sometimes their own justice where the map ran out of ink. Somewhere along those years something bent, a drought of money, a surplus of grievance. The same skills that made a lawman useful: horses, firearms, reading rooms. Keeping your own counsel translate too easily into outlawry when the month will not balance. And pride hates to ask for help. Neighbors later said the shift came by inches, not a leap. Little skimming, a little favor for a friend with cattle whose brand didn't quite match the story. Bad company lifts a man like wind lifts dust. Sudden, pervasive, hard to admit when you're in it. By 1890, the line had been crossed with both boots. Bob's jaw said a different way. Grat carried himself like a man who had chosen a road that would not circle back. Emmett, youngest of the three soon to be famous, kept the loose grin of a kid who still believed Rome's could be charmed into forgiving him. Bill, restless, more politician than pistol at first, hovered at the edges like weather. They were not yet the Dalton Gang. They were brothers trying to turn speed into money and finding that money asks for more than speed. A ranch here, a losing venture there, that behaves like burrs in a ham. Then came trains, iron timetables rolling through a landscape built for horses. Safes on rails, schedules that could be studied, telegraphs that could be dodged if you understood where poles thinned. A plan needs an introduction. The brothers found one. First jobs, California trouble, and a jail door that wouldn't hold. A small-scale robbery becomes a rehearsal. Southern Pacific detectives get names. Visalia learns how quick a Dalton can be when a window is the last polite option. Crimes seldom begin famous. They start as experiments measured in minutes and fences. Work and worry braided themselves into a choice the Daltons would retell a dozen different ways. Southern Pacific train stopped where it preferred not to. Bags handed down with the politeness fear. Learns quickly. Pinkertons and railroad detectives are patient professionals. Names were collected like seed. California jails measuring the brothers with the cool eye of institutions that have seen everything once already. Iron doesn't always fit the man. Grat escaped Visalias. Story for a century, file work, carelessness by a guard, resourcefulness by a prisoner. Whatever makes your favorite old-timer swears by. Leaner in trust, heavier in intention. The gang coalesced now in more definite form. Emmett close, Bill in and out, plus riders whose names drift in the record like wood smoke. Charlie Blackfist Bryant, Dick Broadwell, Bill Power, others on certain nights when the pay looked good and the odds looked kind. If a plan has a rhythm, there's did. Cut telegraph, flag the train, separate engine from cars. Convince the express messenger with a persuasion that didn't quite require hurry. One job taught the next. They learned which curves slow an engineer by force of physics. Which towns post men with rifles at benches near depots just because evenings are long. Red Rock heard their bootsteps. Pryor creaked by some accounts. The sums weren't huge at first, not worth headlines east of the river, but enough to keep horses shod and appetites believing tomorrow could be easier. Then a dare Indian territory, summer heat on ties. An MKT train in motion through a small place that did not ask for history. Brothers and friends lay low by the tracks, a signal, a slow down. Men up and moving with the confident choreography of a drill team that knows this performance. Deputies and guards fired. The town joined reflexively from shadowed porches. Lead went both ways, some of it fatal by accident. A doctor riding the caboose was struck, humans doing their ordinary jobs in the wrong minute. The gang got clear with cash and guild riding double. Newspapers figured their adjectives. The name Dalton started keeping company with Notorious, which is the first step toward not sleeping well in any county. With each success, the circle tightened. Rangers, informants, found that ink can buy mercy. Plans found that maps talk. And yet the brothers leaned into the belief that one large grab could tilt fate back in their favor. But town and daylight make a story so bold it canceled the smaller ones. Coffeyville learned this plan before it could enjoy its coffee. The bank's a block apart. Fake whiskers that fooled no one who had ever bought hardware there. Citizens who stopped being spectators before the first door swung. Kansas in early October is all clean edges like that seems pleased with itself. Towns that feel taller after harvest. Coffeyville sat with its back to the verdigris river and its face to trade. A hardware store that sold everything from nails to nerves. To banks within a short walk of each other. CM, Condon and Company, and the First National. The Daltons and their partners, Bob, Grat, Emmett, Bill Power. Dick Broadwell rode in from the west around 9 a.m., disguises tugged into place, false beards. Long dusters, hats pulled like curtains. Horses tied in an alley that acted like a funnel if you drew your diagram wrong. Problem 1, locals knew the Daltons the way small towns know everything. Brothers had lived nearby. Strides and shoulders don't change just because whiskers do. A boy pointed. A clerk squinted. A name was said out loud before the first vault door was. They split, Bob and Emmett to First National, Grat with Power and Broadwell to Condon. Inside one bank, a teller stalled with the quiet courage that keeps towns from becoming headlines. Time lock, he said, whether true or useful didn't matter, it bought minutes. Inside the other, cashier and clerks did similar arithmetic. Outside, Coffeyville armed itself from shelves. Men streamed from the hardware store with rifles that had been sitting on pegs tasting dust, and now tasted purpose. Merchants took positions in doorways they swept themselves every morning. The street became geometry, angles, cover, fire, when the gang emerged with whatever they had managed to pry loose. Less than planned, more than legal, the town spoke. Boone irons by the lumber yard, defenders across from Isham's hardware. Clerks who had never shot at a man astonished to find their hands steady. Shots crossed the square like tightly written sentences. Bob went down near the alley of fall that unspooled the gang's last confidence. Power and Broadwell staggered, bled. Tried to make distance answer for planning and found it would not. Grat fired to cover a retreat that could not decide which direction deserved the word. Emmett did a foolishly brave thing, ran to help his brother with the kind of love that writes its own eulogy. He took a storm of bullets and kept moving until the math of bodies and blood said stop. Then the echoes shut the door, for outlaws lay either still or still trying to be alive. Citizens were dead, others wounded. The bank counters smelled like gunpowder and ledger ink. Coffeyville had done what Northfield had done years before, reminded the century. That towns have agency. Emmett lived. Barely. More than 20 wounds by common telling. He breathed shallow and answered questions. Politely, he was young enough to have years ahead if mercy and courts agreed to cooperate for once. The brothers' bodies, Bob and Grat, were laid out for photographs the newspapers bought and printed, until the ink itself seemed offended, and planned that it dreamed of funding a getaway to the coast-funded funerals. Instead, trials, a sales calendar, and the splinters of aftermath, Emmett's sentence. Bill Dalton's next moves, dueling waiting in the wings, a widow's errands, a town's long memory. Courts do a slower kind of drama. Emmett Dalton lay in a jail bed stitched like a map. Doctors worked. Reporters bent over their notebooks in a posture that looks like prayer trial. Testimony crisp as autumn apples. A young outlaw who had not intended to be an orphan of his own, making answered questions without bravado. Sentence, life, or a number of years that might as well be that. He went to a Kansas prison where winter knows how to persuade steel to ache. And summers smell like laundry and regret. He wrote letters. He stacked days like kindling. He learned that survival can be a project undertaken without applause. Bill Dalton, older brother, with a politician's smile and a planner's restlessness, was not in Coffeyville that morning by most accounts, but his orbit crossed the dueling crowd soon after, forming a new constellation papers called by many names Dalton Dueling Oklahomers, the wild bunch of the territory before Cassidy's crew claimed. The phrase in Wyoming lore, they robbed banks in long afternoons and lost men in short ones. Bill met his end in 1890 for accomplices rifles at a farmhouse, his career closing with the abruptness common to that trade. Coffeyville collected itself slowly. Families mended what mending would allow. A monument rose later because towns need stone to hold the weight of memory longer than human. Backs can. The railroads adjusted procedures, more guards, better safes. Telegraphers who learned to send a warning with less panic and more precision. Pinkertons filed. U.S. Marshals added years to faces. Saloons told and rattled until a good story became better and then suddenly worse through repetition. In a cell, Emmett began to change shapes in the way with seasons. He converted by his word and oath. R.S. from brash to thoughtful, from loud to low. He wrote an account later, Beyond the Law, that read like a man squaring with himself and selling his past in the only currency left. Cautionary detail. Pardon came after 14 years, 1907, a formal breath, a handshake with open air. He married, moved west, worked within the new century's angles, Los Angeles lot work. Story advising where it would keep young men from making old errors. Small parts on sets where myths learned to walk again in better hats. He lived long into 1937, a length of time that let him become what few outlaws do, an old man with errands and a choice about which stories to encourage and which to let sit quietly. But the Daltons leave, and who picks up the tune next? Banks and trains still tempt men, but the stage is moving northwest into canyons and payrolls, with partners who become postcards and a last run to South America if you like the romantic versions. What do the Daltons leave on the table for us to set our tea beside as we fall asleep? First, that families make heroes and villains in the same rooms and sometimes in the same person depending on the year. Frank Dalton's star and death laid a path the others could have followed longer. They followed it briefly, then chose the road that pays to quick and ends quicker. Second, that towns are not just backdrops. Northfield taught that lesson. Coffeyville repeated it in a dialect Plains people understood. Find, arm yourself, cover each other. Be accurate, get low. Be brave the small way that keeps children's breakfast safe tomorrow. Third, that newspapers need. Names. The Daltons gave them one that sits forever between two columns, outlaw and family. The photos coats button on bodies that had already left argue for caution. Whenever a camera considers itself a jury, Emmett's long afterlife adds nuance. A man can be many selves. The boy who ran into the street for his brother at Coffeyville became the man who told Hollywood do it different. Some listened, some sold ticket stubs instead. The techniques the gang practiced, telegraph cuttings, engine separations. Managing a crowd with a voice more than with a trigger will be refined by others who studied their mistakes harder than their successes. Wyoming and Utah will hum with the next version. Payroll safes will travel canyon tracks that echo, with hooves brighter than thunder. Two names stand ready like a chorus. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, partners with charm for days and a sense of humor that got them invited to more rooms. Then we're good for them. A gang that liked to be photographed on purpose, the Fort Worth Five in suits grinning at the future. Like it owed them an apology. We will meet them next in 5 long comparts, mines and sheep country, AT and SF, and Union Pacific payrolls at a place's quiet smile. Pinkertons who learned to travel farther. Then that slow fade to South America in stories and in some ledgers too. For tonight, let Coffeyville Square go still. See the hardware store with its rifles back on pegs. See the bank clerk sweeping powder from the countertop with hands that will be steady again next week. See Emmett breathing shallow and alive, choosing a future most men in his trade never got to choose. The West keeps walking. We keep our breath even, and we carry the lesson forward that roads fork. That brothers can be both weather and shelter, and that a town at noon can be the best kind of law when it decides together to be.